1,000 books, songs, plays, articles, and movies have been written about the 1925 Scopes evolution trial. But history comes alive when you walk into the courtroom in Dayton, Tennessee. You can almost hear William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow argue about creation and evolution, and so much more. Visit the Scopes Trial Museum, and each July see the trial reenacted in the courtroom where it happened. For more information, check out the Scopes Festival website, scopesfestival.com.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Nossel. I'm the CEO of PEN America, and I want to thank Masha Gessen and Wesley, of course, for being here with me today. PEN America is happy to be participating in this year's Southern Festival of Books. I want to thank Humanities Tennessee for hosting us. Just a bit about PEN. We stand at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and around the world. We talk about ourselves as championing the freedom to write, recognizing the power of the word to transform the world. So our mission is to unite writers and their allies to celebrate creative expression and defend the liberties that make it possible. We recently, just over the last week or two, have launched a campaign under the heading of What to Expect When You Are Electing, which is focused on the current threat to our democracy posed by disinformation. So we're hosting events all over the country to let people know what they can expect in this election season like no other, and to close the space for conspiracy theories and disinformation to flourish. For more information, follow us at PEN America on Twitter or Facebook, and check out our website at www.pen, like the old-fashioned writing instrument.org. Thanks so much. I'm now really thrilled to welcome Pulitzer Prize winning critic and journalist Wesley Morris and National Book Award winner Masha Gessen. Their full bios are on the event page, and I urge you to check them out. And there you are, Wesley, and there you are, I think, Masha. Yes, both of you, thankfully. Both here with us. Welcome, and thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. So let's get started. I'll begin with this. You know, as we meet here with 27 days to go until this monumental election that none of us can look away from, I'm wondering how you evaluate where we are as a democracy. We've talked a lot about how well our institutions have stood up, you know, whether that's the courts or federal agencies or state governments. But I'm wondering the realms that you are part of, the intelligentsia, artists, writers, journalists, how well have they held up to their obligations and role in society at this time? Do you feel like they've utilized their influence as well as they might have? Do you see elements of co-optation, exhaustion? How do you appraise that? Masha, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, Suzanne, as you know, I always challenge the premise of the question first. So first of all, I want to register my strenuous objection to talking about the election as being 27 days away. We're in an election season. Voting has already begun in many places, but also we're not going to know the results of this election on November 3rd. So any form that we can use to amplify this message, that there's November 3rd is not a day like other election days, is super important. And this is one of the ways in which I think my world, the media world, has been completely failing. There should be a huge banner on every landing page of every publication that says why we're not calling the election on November 3rd. That you will be able to click through and read an analysis of how this election is happening and how slim the chances of being able to call the election on November 3rd are. And, and how people should be thinking about this, considering that, of course, we're going to see Fox News call the election and no one else called the election. I think. I mean, I may be wrong. There may be a Biden landslide.
Masha, there have been stories about this guy who works in the Fox News. Like, I don't exactly know what I mean, I read the story. I know what he does, but like, he's the guy who is like at Fox News is supposed to be like, yo, you cannot call this. It's not time yet. People are still voting. We're still counting the votes. So, I mean, I'm with you. I feel like we are in a rolling situation. And I mean, even Suzanne, as we, I mean, I know that the three of us know this, but like, one of the amazing things about what is happening right now is like, while people are voting, there are people out there actively still trying to disenfranchise people from beginning to like use their mail-in ballot. There have been lots of stories done by people about people who are like, it's very easy to screw these things up so that your vote gets your ballot gets thrown out. So there's still a lot of work to be done to even, to the extent that it can even be ensured, to ensure that people at least believe in some aspect of the integrity of the electoral process.
No, absolutely. I just want to come in on your point about the Fox News decision desk guru. His name is Arnon Mishkin, and we actually have him coming next week to an event that PEN America is doing, which we're just kind of launching and announcing today with Fox News and the AP and probably one other news organization, Decision Desk. So we will be engaging with him about how he is going to handle the reporting on this unprecedented election, because we completely agree he is a crucial figure in this puzzle. But I'm curious how both of you, there is a lot being reported about the election, about disinformation, about mail-in ballots, about the president and his messaging and discrediting of absentee and mail-in ballots. And there's a kind of furor building up and a lot of anxiety. And I've heard from some sources that actually what we need to do is sort of tamp that down, and that there's a risk that people won't go out and vote if they feel the process is so polluted or unpredictable. And so I'm curious, how you think the media is doing when it comes to, on the one hand, sort of alerting people and making them aware of what to expect, but on the other hand, not fostering, this profound anxiety and sense of chaos.
Well, I mean, I will just say that I'm experiencing both things. I have seen stories and read stories where there are journalists out in various parts of the country kind of explaining people's ballots to them, or asking people if they understand their ballots, which is, there's a podcast called Reveal, and they just did, I think this week or last week, they did an episode devoted to this question of voter disenfranchisement and voter suppression. And one of the reporters actually called up a guy, I think it was about Wisconsin actually, calls up a gentleman in Wisconsin who had his ballot thrown out. And the reporter is basically saying, hey, sir, did you know that your ballot got tossed out? He didn't know. And second, do you have any idea why that would be? And the reporter then explains to him why his ballot was tossed out. It was a dumb reason. The reason was that he didn't have his wife's address. He didn't live. His wife was his witness, which is, I mean, again, I'll wait for Masha to come back to make this other point because I wonder how she'll feel about it. But the wife was supposed to be the witness. And the witness is supposed to state the witness's address on the ballot. And they assumed that because they were husband and wife, that it would be common sense that they shared the same address. Not true throughout the ballot. So, I mean.
Are you sort of suggesting that the journalist in a sense, went too far and kind of broke the fourth wall and became kind of an actor in trying to ensure that this guy's vote was counted? Or
No, because the ballot was already, the vote was, he already voted. So he just was, I think if anything, the reporter was sort of making this person aware that this is the Republican voter. And I don't know, it just seemed very, as a listener, I didn't have an ethical problem with it. I thought it was actually illuminating. I'm going to vote in person. Just throwing that out there. But oh, hey.
Hi, my computer died. Just died.
Hey, hopefully you're back now. Okay, great. Well, anything can happen on Streamcast, so on we go.
Anyway, Masha, I was just talking about how I had heard this report on a show called Reveal, this audio show, audio journalism show, where the reporter had called up a guy in Wisconsin whose vote had been thrown out, and was walking him through not his vote, sorry, his ballot, and why his ballot had been trashed, and the guy didn't know, and so the reporter's like, well, this is what happened. They threw out your ballot because the witness, the notary, I think he had a witness. His wife was his witness, and she didn't put her address on the envelope because they assumed that it would be common sense if it was a husband and a wife that they'd be living in the same space, right? And they'd share the same address. Not true. Ballot thrown out. And so Suzanne and I were talking about whether or not, there had been some ethical. Suzanne wasn't accusing this of being a matter like bad ethics or anything. I was just clarifying that what I found illuminating was that this was indicative of the sorts of things that voters are, the hoops that we'll have to go through as voters to get our votes counted in certain parts of the world. And that's the thing I would not have known had it not been for this reporting.
Right. But going back to Suzanne, to your question about the state of our democracy, this is the other premise that I would question. We talk about democracy as, especially in this country, as a set of institutions, as though it were like a house that you could build and live in. Democracy is always an aspiration. Democracy is always a dream, right? It's definitely always a work in progress. We haven't been doing a great job, right? And these kinds of stories about how people's ballots are thrown out because of small formalities, how people are systematically disenfranchised and not given the opportunity to vote. These are the kinds of stories that I, as a journalist, am used to doing from countries that we don't think of as democracies. Right, and I don't think we should think of this country as a democracy. I think we should think of democracy as something that we want,
right,
but not something that we've ever had.
Does it worry? I'm curious about this from both of you, because I think your comment has a lot of resonance for people, and I remember hearing, the minute Trump was elected, and a lot of us were devastated, but there were some people who sort of, I'd say, almost shrugged their shoulders, because they're kind of like, we've been dealing with this all along. This is no surprise. This is what this country is about and capable of. And I think we hear, a fair amount of that now, like what you're saying, we've never really been a democracy. I wonder if you think that kind of frame is helpful, or if you think it sort of feeds into a complete kind of loss of confidence and lack of recognition about, what has been good and appealing about this country over time, and where you would sort of strike that balance and how you talk about these things. My own reaction when Trump was elected to these people who said, this is sort of nothing new, was kind of shock. And I also felt as the administration unfolded that was validated, because it was a hell of a lot worse than what we'd had before. But what do the two of you think?
Well, I want to be perfectly clear about what I'm saying. I'm not saying that other countries are democracies and this one isn't and has never been. I'm saying there's never been a democracy in the history of the world. Democracy is always something that you're in the process of building, that you're trying to create. It never actually happens, right? And I think that that is both a sobering and a hopeful idea, right? We can be in the process of making democracy together. That's what we want. We want to be always in that process. We want to be in the process. We don't want to be in the process of doing the opposite, right? Of making the space that we live in less democratic. I think that for most of its history, this country has been building democracy,
Right.
And there have been times when it hasn't, and certainly the last 4 years it's been going backwards. I would argue that you know, the right way to think about Donald Trump is to think of him in both ways at the same time, right? The conditions for creating him. The conditions for Donald Trump being elected were created certainly over the last, 15 years before his election, and longer, but certainly the 15 years since 9/11. But also, he is unlike any president we've ever had. Both things are true at the same time.
Also, though, additionally, I think that he is. He is many things in terms of metaphor, right? Like the thing that he represents is powerful in that, you know, he's simultaneously proof of this lack of this sort of broken democracy, or this sort of unrealized democracy, and, you know, for some people, an incentive to dream harder or to fight more to create this thing. And I don't know, there is something, you know, I'm speaking as a person who is very familiar with the idea of what it means to vote, and, you know, how, you know, people in my family have, you know, really thought about, you know, it's important to be able to have the right to vote and to be able to to vote in an election. But, you know, the reality at the same time is there are frameworks in place to make that very difficult. And so there's never been, I think for a lot of people, including myself, there is always this awareness. There's this belief that, to Masha's point, that it is a possible thing. But at the same time, you sort of look around this country, you know, whether it's right now or, you know, 300 years ago, and, you know, you ask what it's for and what more it could be doing.
Well, let me ask about sort of this resurgent reckoning on issues of racism and exclusion in our country that we've been undergoing over the last few months, that I think has been eye-opening and catalytic. And, you know, we saw in state legislatures proposals moving forward. We saw city councils and mayors reallocating funds. We saw heads rolling in police departments across the country. And I'm curious how you sort of evaluate that now, whether you see that, you know, believe this momentum is going forward and this is going to be sort of a real watershed moment where we look back on 2020 as, you know, if we did the milestones of racial justice in this country, that 2020 would be, you know, will end up being a major one. And how do you think we might, if so, describe it sort of a few decades hence?
I don't know that, not to be Masha on this, but the premise of the question, I just feel like the thing about what's happening right now is that there had been this energy toward, you know, what we're calling some stab at systemic reform. But the fact of the matter is that what we're talking only about the police. These police unions are more powerful, I think. They've been made more powerful than the waves that are trying to get them to reconsider themselves. I think the conversation about reform and defunding and abolition, I think those conversations are, and the calls for those things are happening more vociferously than they had previously happened. But I actually don't think, I mean, one of the things that was interesting about what happened in Minneapolis was that, you know, there had been these pledges made to make these sort of wholesale, you know, large scale reforms. And it looks like they don't seem likely to happen in the way that had been previously discussed. And I think that one of the reasons to keep the protest pressure and the political pressure on, you know, in local government, on these municipalities and city halls, is to remind the people who are sort of the city council people, for instance, and the mayors who are reluctant to, and the state legislators, if we're going to go more broadly, to keep their feet to the fire in some ways. I mean, and to challenge the power that has been invested in these police unions, if we're talking about the cops. So I don't actually know. I mean, I think that this moment is demanding something that people are hearing, but what happens on the other side of those demands is still an open question.
Right, I agree. I mean, at this point, we can't know. I think that what we can be fairly certain about is that this is not a moment that we will forget. Right. This year has been groundbreaking. It has been revolutionary. Right. Will this? Will we remember 2020, the uprising of 2020, as as a great momentous effort before a long period of darkness or an opening of light? Well, we can't know yet, right? But what we do know is that it was an incredible illustration. It has been an incredible illustration of something that's really kind of commonplace in political science, which is that times of political crisis are always times of opportunity, right? And what we have seen is, and here I would argue with Wesley a little bit, because I think that it's not just about the police, right?
No,
it's very much about reappraising the narrative with which we have all been raised, right? This, the narrative of the land of opportunity, and very much sort of saying, we can't think about this country without thinking about the history of enslavement. We can't think about this country without thinking about colonization. We can't look at these monuments. We can't look at these history books. We can't look at the memorial of all the memorialization with which we're surrounded without thinking about it critically. And these ideas have really traveled, together with the idea of defunding the police, have really traveled from the outer margins of consciousness into the mainstream in an amazingly short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that will have lasting consequences. It's too early to say what those consequences will be, but it will have lasting consequences.
Yeah, I mean, a couple tangible manifestations. The Mellon Foundation announced yesterday they're putting $250 million into an initiative focused on kind of reimagining monuments for this country, and to build all sorts of new monuments and contextualize existing ones. We've also seen in publishing, a kind of unprecedented appointments of a number of very high-profile, very senior Black women editors who are taking on new positions at Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster. I'm curious for each of you, recognize that you both think this is indeterminate and we don't know. What else would you want to see in the next, year that you think, would help pave the way for people to look back on this as a time of true transformation?
I'm sorry, Suzanne, you were kind of fading in and out. The sound for me was fading in and out. So what else would we want to happen in the next year?
Yeah, to sort of, so that to increase the chance that we can look back on this as a time of transformation.
Well, there's this election
There's that, but I think in a way that's the obvious. But look at the Biden administration. I mean, the election itself obviously is historic, and Kamala Harris is historic. But what do you want to see behind that?
I mean, the Biden, let's imagine that things go according to the best possible scenario, which is that we get a Biden presidency. And we take the Senate. Democrats take the Senate. And I think that what worries me are sort of limitations of the imagination if that happens, right? There will be a lot of great things that will definitely happen during a Biden presidency, right? We will see, I think, a rejuvenated welfare state. I think we will really possibly learn a new way or relearn a way of talking about ourselves as an interconnected people, right? I think there will be major reform in healthcare. I think, climate change will become an unmovable part of American politics, right? These are all absolutely necessary things that will happen during the Biden presidency. What I'm worried will not happen is a reckoning with how we got here in the first place. That this system, right, the two-party system, the system that marries money and power, gave us Donald Trump. And I think that Joe Biden, who's a very nice guy, is also a guy who has spent most of his life in the system, knows it very well, I think loves it genuinely. And I can't imagine that happening during the Biden presidency, but it's an absolutely essential thing that has to happen.
I think that I agree with Masha 100%. I also think that the thing that I would most like to see is directly connected to the things she doesn't think is going to happen. And I don't think it's going to happen either. But my little pie in the sky fantasy is that we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Something that, and I don't mean I want it on TV. I want it on TV every night of the week. I don't think the government should be exclusively involved. I think it should involve every prong of this society. And I think that we have to begin to explain to this country the story of itself, because it's a thing that's never happened. We've gotten very close to it. Well, not very close, but we've tried to do whatever we mean by reckoning, and to have something along the lines of truth and reconciliation or reparations or whatever. We've had these different opportunities throughout the history of this country to attempt something like that. But if a thing that I think, like a moonshot that I believe is worth trying to achieve, is trying to pull in as many disparate aspects of this country from as many different sectors as we can, to put on every single network some event that explains and reckons with, not just explains and tells the story of, but it actually sort of shows people simultaneously what is possible and why making what is possible has been so difficult for so long. I think it is achievable. I am trying to help achieve it, but I do think that it's a hard thing to do. It's never been done. Other countries have tried it with varying degrees of success, and I think that some of that reckoning in that truth and reconciliation process, it almost certainly involves the means by which capitalism is fueling a great deal of the dysfunction in this country. And I wonder, a really great question for Joe Biden, that I don't know who was going to ask him this, but I wonder how he feels about, complicity is might be too strong a word, but his comfort with the ways, the relationship between money and power. And has he learned anything about that relationship in his, 50 plus years in 47 years in elected office? I don't know, but I mean, I feel like a multi-night event, of months-long event that asks everybody such questions is a great one to ask our potential president of the United States.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm curious. I feel like I can sort of imagine what I think of as like a 9/11 style commission that would look into all these aspects of what's happened, the self-dealing and the nepotism and the corruption and the kind of hollowing out of the State Department and the Justice Department and regulatory agencies. But I think you're getting to something different. I think that work probably should be done because we need to understand. I think our institutions were more vulnerable than we recognized, and to know how to shore them up. And this happened after Watergate. There was all kinds of legislation to sort of nail the barn door shut. I think some of which has stood the time, others less so. But I think you're getting, Wesley, to something kind of more searching and sort of existential for the society. And I'm wondering, like, what form would that take? I mean, is this sort of town halls across the country where local mayors, fess up to, what facilitated their political rise? Or is this big donors, doing a mea culpa, or Sheldon Adelson, asking for forgiveness and repenting? Like, what would this look like? How might this unfold?
I mean, the way I was imagining it was like there'd be smart people asking people questions. So there'd be people telling stories. It would involve power, but I mean, we're talking about, a country that's been founded on genocide and enslavement, the repression of rights for women, the exploitation of the poor. I mean, I think that just if we're going to talk about changing things, we should know what it is we're changing. If we're going to talk, for instance, about reparations, I think reparations should come with the story. Because, if you're going to, this is never going to happen. But like, let's just say it happened. Like this, like somehow the federal government got it together to somehow address or compensate or right the inequalities between Black people and white people, but maybe other races too, that come out of inequalities born from enslavement. I think that is there's no place these problems don't touch, and there is no. I mean, we can be as imaginative as we can possibly be about a solution. But I think, to me it happens on TV. I mean, TV is the most important. It's a thing people will pay attention to. I mean, it can have other dimensions, but I think the most obvious way to begin to get at this is to put it in front of people and let them see, the difficulty, and to let them sit with how hard it is.
Do we lose Wesley? Mid-sentence? Masha, I think over to you.
Okay, I will pick up, I hope, exactly where Wesley left off, which is that I agree. It's it's a question of storytelling, and we don't. I think that a successful effort to address the historical injustices of this country involves a lot of storytelling and involves solutions that we can't imagine at the moment. Right, that is the spirit of restorative justice, is actually first telling stories about the injury, and then figuring out how that injury might be redressed. And at this point, we can't tell whether it's going to be Sheldon Adelson, saying mea culpa. I very much doubt it, and that's not my highest priority at the moment. But even though it's it's super important. But it's a much, much deeper story. It's a much longer story. And we are changed people at the end of learning that story. And that's when we start talking about redress.
But I mean, what about, look, we've had, whether it's Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, the 1619 Project at the New York Times, Yeah, they kind of have, Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, that, kind of have done some of this really powerful storytelling and kind of conversation changing interventions that I think have made a lot of people ask questions or consider, the case for reparations, that was off the table and now is on the table. Now, I'm hearing, what about reparations in media and journalism? What about reparations in publishing? So it's echoing and reverberating. And I mean, I'm wondering, is that sort of enough, or I don't know, I hope we get Wesley back, because his point about how this has to be on television, I think is sort of interesting. Have we kind of, oh, there you are, good, all right. Well, I was just saying, because we've had so many powerful books that have done this type of storytelling that has, changed the narrative and forced people to consider patterns of exclusion and histories. I mentioned 1619 and Ta-Nehisi Coates and the case for reparations and Isabel Wilkerson. Can books, have we sort of exhausted the potential for books to do this and now we need to go on TV, or is it synergistic? How do you sort of see that?
No, I mean, I don't think it's synergistic. It's not, the TV wouldn't supplant the sort of written effort to try to get at these questions too. If anything, I'm exploiting this project would exploit the written efforts of people like Masha to ask these, to get Nicole and Isabel and Ta-Nehisi. I mean, there's William Darity. There's a long list of people who can be involved in this, but I think that it is, there's no bound on who can be involved. I wrote something essentially kind of proposing this, but I had imagined that it would just be some sort of open source idea that some innovative, creative, visionary person would just take and run with. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, this would be a conversation for some producers to have, but I mean, it is very possible to do. I watched the Democratic National Convention. I watched both conventions, but as a production, the Democratic National Convention was really impressive in terms of the way it just formally impressive. And I feel like there's no limit, but I mean, obviously it's built on the scholarship and deep thinking that many, many other people have done.
I mean, one of the things that was so powerful, the example I probably know the best, is the South African situation. There, you had people who were truly complicit, who were kind of the belly of the beast. I mean, special forces agents and assassins who, and they did it because they got exonerated in return for telling their truth. Is there an element of that in what you envision?
Well, this was the thing I was going to ask Masha before I dropped off the call, which was that I've been thinking a lot about what happens to these people in this administration. I mean, do we round them up? And I just have this vision of they can't flee the country. You can't let them get away. There have been so many things that have happened, but that are just sort of beyond the pale, even by our standards in this country. I don't know how, this is a person, the country is being run by a person who can't even acknowledge that he's sick. Do you know what I mean? That he is, he's got a virus. He can't concede to that. So I can't imagine that anybody associated with him thinks that they're in any way culpable for anything else either. But I do wonder, what justice looks like.
Okay, Wesley. Well, I'm going to tell you what justice looks like.
Because I don't know.
Look, I think that we have, and this is something that is incredibly difficult to wrap our minds around. And yeah, I'm not even sure it's possible, right? But we kind of have to hold these things in our minds at the same time. One of which is that I'm deeply convinced that it is not possible for our psyche to let these people, go unpunished. It is very much sort of in the, you know, in the ethos of the system, to just kind of say, okay, let's, you know, let's get them out of office and let's forget that it ever happened, right? I think that would be a horrible, horrible mistake. And part of the reason it would be a horrible, horrible mistake is because this is a country and a culture that punishes indiscriminately for small transgressions, right? That punishes people who don't even transgress, right? That, you know, at this point, a country that fires on peaceful protesters, that tear gases people in the streets. You know, the crime of acting, you know, any transgression that Donald Trump has committed during any one of his days in office, any hour of his in office, is greater than the transgressions I have seen people punished for in the streets of New York City, which is not even the worst place to have been protesting this summer, right? So somehow we have to redress both of these things at the same time. We have to address the spectacle, you know, that we have been subjected to for the last 4 years, of really, you know, in the most profane way we have known yet, of watching somebody who lives according to a different set of rules. You know, the rules that allow him to take money from the treasury, the rules that allow him to partake of the best healthcare possible, and
he didn't even pay for.
That he can't even pay, that we have paid for and he didn't pay for, but he also wants to take the healthcare that we have paid for away from us, right? Like, all of that we have watched has to be A, punished, but B, structurally addressed, right? And that has to happen at the same time, which is an incredibly complicated, impossible to grasp problem, but that's the problem we have to address.
All right, so maybe we need the 9/11 Commission and the Truth and Reconciliation.
I mean, they're conjoined. That
Yeah.
philosophy, that sort of, you know, procedural philosophy, they're conjoined.
All right, I have one. We're almost out of time, but I have a question from someone in our audience, and it's directed to you, Masha, but I hope you'll both respond to it. And I think I understand it. It says, in your recent interview with Brick, you differentiate between the mafia state of those in power versus the adoption of social totalitarianism by the citizenry. And then it says, do you see similarities in the U.S.? I guess, do you see this both phenomena here in the U.S., perhaps?
No, I mean, that's a very specific phenomenon that I wrote a book about when I was writing about Russia, right? Where I think that Russian society reconstituted itself as a totalitarian society when Putin created a mafia state. And that, I think, is a product of 70 years of totalitarianism. At the same time, you know, I want to say that after World War II, this country had a group of people who had fled Nazi Germany, who were going around, you know, like Theodor Adorno and Hannah Arendt, who did not particularly like each other, but who were saying very similar things about this, which is that the tendency toward totalitarianism, the sort of the desire to give up agency and embrace, you know, some sort of crazy ideological savior, is ever present here in this society, right? That is always a risk. That there are elements of totalitarianism in non-totalitarian societies, and I think in the you know, in the years since World War II, we have created this kind of mental separation from history, where that happened over there back in that time. It can't happen here. We're not those kind of people. We're the opposite of that kind of people. You know, that's a very specific structure that has nothing to do to tell us. No, actually, it has everything to tell us. It has everything to tell us about what we're capable of as humans. And we need to be heeding those lessons all the time. The only difference between us and the people who lived under totalitarianism is that they already had it happen, and we can learn from it. That's it.
I can't do better than Masha Gessen on that question.
Totalitarianism, it's tough to go up against her. Yeah.
But I will say one thing though. I do find though this strain between these questions of free expression and, you know, the sort of suppression of rights with, I find to be specific, you know, the sort of anti-mask effort that people have sort of like, you know, gone out of their way to perform as a sort of patriotic duty. You know, this is a call of national, you know, priority to sort of go out and say that you can't take our masks, so you can't make us wear masks. That's an un-American thing to do. That is directly associated to me. I mean, it's obviously comes out of Trump, but I also think that Trump. I mean, it's also connected to this American urge to misconstrue, to sort of bring us back to where we started about this question about this this aspirational democracy. The sort of corollary urge exists to perform that democracy not as an aspiration, but as a thing that was created in the minds of these people and is being disrespected or overstepped by the application of just what I would say is pure rationality. And that, to me, does have a but in some way what I can only call a totalitarian urge. I mean, it is, because it expresses itself in these sort of acts of violence and this sort of willful refusal to acknowledge the reality around this allegedly patriotic energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw it, you know, watching Trump's, you know, star turn in his SUV outside, and just people saying they would die. You know, it was, you know, we haven't really heard that very much in this country. So I think, Masha, if people didn't realize, you know, that this could germinate here, I hope they're seeing it now. I think that wraps up our time. So I just want to thank both of you. I'm glad we got the technical glitches resolved.
Sorry, everybody.
Mostly have one conversation with a couple. Each of you had a brief solo, but then you came back to the duet. So I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I certainly have learned something and gotten some new ideas. And I hope our audience has as well. And we thank the Southern Festival Books for having us.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you very much, Suzanne. And it was great to see you again.
An honor. See ya.